Let's get the recording started so that we can have a replay for everybody. Thank you. I'm so happy that Poppy has been gracious enough to join us today and talk about writing great sex scenes. We are so thrilled to have you here. Thank you, Poppy.
Thank you.
And would you like me to turn the meeting over to you, or are you going to talk, or how do you want to work this?
Yep, I will. I'll chat a little bit about the information that I think I can provide, and then I will happily answer questions if anybody has them.
Okay, that's super. Thank you.
So I will introduce myself first. I'm Poppy Flynn. I've been writing for about 3.5 years, and I'm a full-time author of about 25 books, a few more than that if you count anthologies. I write in several different genres, including sci-fi, fantasy, and reverse harem. But the majority of my books are contemporary, and certainly the stuff that I'm concentrating on right now. But I guess I write at around a heat level 4 to 5, and my books all include kink, BDSM, spanking, and definitely always sex. For today's purposes, I'm just going to concentrate on writing sex scenes, but I'm happy to answer any questions on kink or reverse harem if anybody has them. So the big question is, why is it that so many writers struggle with sex scenes? And one of the primary issues is that it feels too personal, too private. It's like you're putting an intensely intimate part of yourself out there on the page. And initially, that is a mindset that you have to change. So how do you do that? Well, first off, you do have to get past your inhibitions, which I know is easier said than done. But if you're just starting out writing sex scenes, what I would encourage you to do is to read plenty of sex-filled books. Think about what you like, what you don't like about them, and that's something that's going to be different for everyone. So consider the type of thing that you think you'll be most comfortable writing. And then when you're getting down to the doing of it, you know, perhaps get yourself a glass of wine to help yourself relax a little bit, at least until it becomes easier. And then basically you dig deep and you tap into your own fantasies. So the psychology is the first hurdle. In more practical terms, you need to start slowly. And also, really important here, and another way to get over those inhibitions with writing and disassociating yourself from the personal aspect of sex, is to get into the mind of your character. This is what they are doing. This is how they perform, not you. So get into your character's head, because you're the person that knows them best. You've given them an entire fictitious life, and now you're going to give them a fictitious sex drive too. So you think about how they would react, whether they would initiate things or be content to follow somebody else's lead, how they would touch, how they would respond. This is all about them and not you. And that's the big thing to remember. So you're writing about their lustful thoughts and how they perceive what's happening, how they feel about what's going on, about being naked, about their partner's bodies. And it's important to build up the scene, to add plenty of foreplay, because foreplay is essential. It's a tool for setting your scene and creating that build-up. And it's also a way to ease yourself into the writing. So describe your characters as they strip off or strip each other off, not just the physical act, but what they think, how they feel. Make it sensual by using all of the senses, because that's what your reader wants to experience, not just the sights, but the sounds, the smells, the sensations. What's the ambience of the room? Is there music playing? Is there moonlight streaming through a window? Is there a lamp on? Is there a window open, making a breeze or blowing the curtains? Is there fire crackling and the smell of wood smoke? Or there could be candles flickering, or they might be scented. So you need to encompass all of that. It's not, it's one of the things that refines a sex scene and makes it more evocative rather than just being a gratuitous act. And remember that sex is a two-way street. This is something that's happening to both of them. So don't forget the male point of view. What does her skin like? What does her skin feel like under his fingers? What does her hair smell like? Does he like her perfume? Draw out his thoughts and feelings too, because the other thing about sex scenes is that it gives you the opportunity to show a different side to your characters, both the male and the female protagonist. For example, you can show a softer, more giving side to a man, or an unexpectedly kinky side to a quiet and unassuming woman. So use a sex scene to strip them bare, not just physically, but emotionally too. And what you need to do is write in detail. You don't go into a sex scene writing half-heartedly. Don't rush it. And to make it its most successful, you need to use it to move the story forward. Don't just stick a sex scene in for the hell of it, or because you think you need to spice things up. Ensure that there's a reason for the scene and that its outcome affects the way your characters develop within the story. So you're providing an entire experience for your reader. It will flesh out the scene. It will make it easier to write because it's not all just part A fits into slot B. And if you set it all up effectively, then the passion and the actual act of sex should actually naturally kick in. Now, the other thing to mention here is language. Personally, I always find it better to use the language, the sexual euphemisms like channel or sheath or shaft. Use the ones that you're comfortable with. And equally, there will be words that you don't like using. And my personal opinion is don't use them because they won't flow properly within your writing. And another thing to remember is how readers feel about the language you use. You know, it's well known, for example, that people dislike the word moist. So that's one to avoid. And they also dislike clinical terms like penis or vagina. But you should remember that there might be occasions that call for you to use the very words that you dislike. So you do need to let your storyline lead you to a certain extent too. You know, if you're writing dark dubcon, then flowery words aren't going to cut it. So you always need to be aware of context as well. Now, if words specifically are a sticking point for you, then there are actually several sex thesauruses available to buy. But you can just as easily make up a document with your own or simply Google them. That's what I do. Now, a good sex scene is very compelling. It provides your characters with a more profound connection, but importantly, it does the same thing for your readers by providing them with an intimate experience. And again, if you're an established author, remember your readers. Just like some of us feel awkward writing sex scenes, some readers will feel the same. So if you don't currently have sex scenes in your books, then it might be a shock for people who are familiar with your work to actually suddenly come across one. And finally, I do think personally that sex scenes take a lot more of a writer's emotional energy. There's a reason why you see memes which say, for example, insert sex scene here. Now, I tend to be a very linear writer myself, so I right from start to finish, whatever scene is called for. But even I've been guilty of occasionally adding, insert sex scene here, and I have actually written it, in the middle of my whip. Because the bottom line is that you do have to be in the right frame of mind. You do need the security of knowing that one of your kids isn't going to come and peer over your shoulder, or maybe even your husband or your boyfriend, because, none of us want that. If for no other reason than it pulls us out of the very intimate scene that we're trying to create. So it's important to make sure that the circumstances for writing are optimal as well. Because a successful sex scene is not one of those pieces of writing that you can just drop in and out of when you have a spare 5 minutes. It does need some thought and some planning. So to recap the salient points, disassociate yourself. This is about your characters and not you. Build the scene and include plenty of foreplay. Don't rush and don't skimp on what you're writing. Consider the language you use, both what you're comfortable with and what suits your plot. Make sure the sex scene is driven by the plot, and ensure that you have the time and the right environment to tackle it. So I hope that's been helpful. And like I said earlier, if you have any questions, I will do my best to answer them.
Yes, I appreciate very much the points that you brought out, because it seems like I've run across some writings where the sex scenes read like a how-to instructional manual. And then I've read some, and perhaps have written some, that are so esoteric that it's like, okay, did they or didn't they? And there is, I agree. Oh, thank you, Carolyn. Yes, I agree that having all the senses in there is so very important. And for myself, that's probably where I need to spend a little bit more time. I did.
Yeah.
And
I guess that's where you've got to consider your entire scene, just like you consider a scene, just a normal scene with dialogue between a couple. You don't just sit there with dialogue. You talk about the environment. You talk about you add all of the different senses, whether it's cold, what the weather is like, what your surroundings are like. And you need to treat a sex scene exactly the same. You need to incorporate that environment, and that's what stops it from being the how-to manual, like you said.
Right. Mm-hmm. And I also appreciate what you had said about finding time by yourself.
Yeah,
early.
Absolutely. It's one of those things that I do have to consider myself now. I have a 14-year-old son who is currently medically unfit for school. And so he's at home, and I do have an office. I'm very lucky to have a dedicated office, but my door is closed, but it doesn't stop him from walking in, and honestly, even if it's one of my younger son is less likely to look at what I'm writing. I have 2 older sons, and they are older. One's 24, the other one's 35, and they will come and look over my shoulder, and I find it horrendously embarrassing.
Yeah, my husband, I think when I very first started writing my first novel, I was sitting in the living room writing while he was watching football or something, and he kept looking over at me, and I thought that was kind of strange. And when I got through, I said, "Oh, I just finished writing a sex scene." He says, "I know." And I said, how did you know? He says, the look on your face. I'm going, oh no, I could never do this in front of anybody again. So we had a request from Carolyn, I believe it was, about tips on reverse harem. Let me come back to the, what are your biggest tips for writing successful reverse harem?
Well, I will say first that I personally consider reverse harem one of the most difficult things to write, because you have so many people to consider. You have so many body parts to consider, you know. So you do have to get out of your head sometimes when you're writing reverse harem to decide whether what you're describing is sometimes even anatomically possible, you know. One of the things that I was told by another reverse harem writer was to stick to only two points of view. So have your female point of view, but only have one male point of view. And so that you're simplifying for yourself, because you still have to have dialogue. You have to be very careful with your dialogue tags so that, you know, when somebody is reading, they know who is being referred to, who's saying what, who's doing what. And in those situations, it's, you know, it's one of those times when you really need to go back carefully after you've written your scene and think very clinically about whether it makes sense, you know, whether you're being clear about all of the different people that are involved.
So I take it reverse harem is not necessarily one woman who has a variety of men when she chooses, but it may also be a group activity.
There are two different versions of reverse harem, I've realized, and that is you have one group of writers who will write almost separate characters. You know, those sort of two different aspects to reverse harem. It was only when I my own, and I was quite surprised, because until then, you know, I'd thought it was all one great big happy party.
Are you able to see the comments, Poppy? So
Let me hang on. Yeah, let me check through them now. Hang on. Right, okay, I've got one that says, what's a great resource for beginners or writers wanting to learn BDSM? I would say read other BDSM books, so that you're getting a feel for it. Also, I mean, Google is great, you know, you really can't beat it. And what I would say is look at a lot of different resources so that you're getting a lot of different viewpoints. But if you're going to write BDSM, you do need to familiarize yourself with the terminology. Oh, excuse me, hang on. you do need to familiarize yourself with the terminology so that you know that what you're writing about is correct. Because the people who read it, a lot of them you'll find actually do live the lifestyle, you know, so they will know if what you're writing isn't correct. So the group orgy, and you know, like I said, there are two different you know, groups of writers. There are some and I don't know quite how people differentiate them, because, you know, sometimes to me it feels as if you've just got you know, that she's with each alone, does that just mean that she's got 3 boyfriends or 5 or whatever? And how do they all feel about each other? I almost think that that's more difficult to write than the group thing myself.
Can I take a stab at that?
Yeah, please
Writing
do.
in it. So yeah, reverse harem is a good chunk of what I've been reading, and it's obviously what I'm starting out with in writing. And in terms of the outside of sex scenes, it is a difficult balancing act, especially in you know, your typical novel length book, because you do have to balance, you know, her going through the same beats with each and every guy, because you want to see her have that romance story with each and every single guy. So you have to balance that outside of the sex scenes. And then from my experience in reading, when it gets to actual sex scenes, she'll often have a solo first experience with each of the guys. They don't just jump into, okay, we're going to have group sex now. Unless in very rare situations where what was it? Groupie by CM Student comes to mind, where, you know, the 5 guys that she hooked up with were all rock stars and they were used to that sort of shit. So it was, yeah, sure, she did like 4 guys in one night. But then when it gets to larger group sex, I want to say that it's typically female point of view, simply because, you know, you got to pick who, you know, who in any scene, you want to pick whose point of view is going to give the clearer understanding of the situation. And with everything happening to the girl, that tends to be who gets the point of view. There's been a very few times where I've seen it from a guy's point of view, but it's kind of like, you know, the guy was in charge in that particular sex scene. And so, you know, but most of the time it's, you know, seeing it through her, you know, through her eyes and her experience, and how is she experiencing having 2, 3, 4 guys at once, and the fun and logistics of that particular scene. So yeah.
Well, my books, I do write mostly from the female point of view, but I do add in the male point of view. And I might do that in the same chapter, you know, just with a line break. Because I write alpha male, then I guess it's a natural thing to add in that point of view. And especially because my books contain a lot of kink, you know, and so they are the protagonist in that particular situation. Now, I mean, I guess it depends who you read at the end of the day. My books, my good friend who also writes reverse harem, both of our books, you know, we dive in with all of the men from the beginning. So, but the books are set up that way in the first instance. You know, these aren't just random people that have, you know, that have been plucked off the street and dumped together. You know, my most popular book is a reverse harem, and it's a cowboy book, and they are three brothers. You know, so that relationship is already there. But yes, I'm aware that there are different standpoints to how you come to a reverse harem, and I guess that's, you know, a personal thing as well, you know, and how you feel comfortable writing.
Question. I get tired of reading the same old on the bed type sex, and I was wondering what kind of places I'd like to have some more variety. What is like some places they can have sex? Any ideas? Anything's welcome, but I just don't like the same old bed scene.
I guess it depends how your book is set up. Because I write a lot of club romance, therefore I have a lot of opportunities to put sex scenes in clubs, in private rooms, in clubs, in public areas of clubs. But you know, there's always the opportunity of, you know, shower sex, up against the wall, you know, things. And I guess this is why I say to people to read, you know, because it gives you a wealth of other people's views on that kind of thing as well.
I want to add that you can also explore positions.
Yeah, absolutely.
When it comes to it, and also what they like to do. Well, not what they like to do, but their sex.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
In their profession. In my novella, the main character is a mixed martial artist. So there's a particular position that his wife enjoys, which is the hip lift. And so that kind of breaks the monotony of just laying on the bed, you know. Actually, I get into graphing myself just to make sure the positions are, you know, at least feasible, you know. So
yeah, absolutely.
Poppy, can I take you back to the distinction between erotica and erotic literature? And then when we talk about terms such as smut and whatnot, because I came across the term eros, which I kind of like as a definition of sensual sex, but it's not explicit, if that makes sense.
I mean, the main difference between erotica and erotic romance is that erotic romance is plot driven, whereas erotic romance tends to have very little plot and just a lot of sex. Whereas erotic romance, you know, you have all of the sex, but you have it within the framework of a complete plot line. So you have the entire arc from, you know, the beginning of this couple's situation to their hopefully happy ever after. And erotica tends not to have that.
Thank you.
erotica is so much easier to write because half the words are oh.
Yes, I mean, in a lot of ways, you're right. You know, if you're comfortable writing sex, then then what erotica doesn't need is a lot of plot. And you know, and sometimes people, you know, find it easier to just write about the deed and not actually think about, you know, how these people meet, you know, what their overarching story is, and you know, how they have their ending. You know, that some of those things are just as difficult to write as writing a sex scene. The difference with sex scenes is I think our personal view of putting those things onto paper, you know, knowing that somebody else is going to be reading them, knowing that people that you know will read them, you know, people that, even if it's not your friends or your family, you know, it may be people who you meet through your reader group or your newsletter or a book signing. You know, it's coming face to face, or even in writing with those people, and knowing that, you know, they're going to have read what you've written, and you do you have to disassociate yourself from it. That's the only way that I can really kind of describe it. You know, you have to you have to think in different terms, and kind of divorce yourself from writing sex and being the person that meets these people.
That's true. I've had people ask me if my stories are autobiographical.
Oh yes, I've had that too.
And considering that half of them take place 200 years ago, the answer is no. But it's funny how
people ask my husband all the time if the things that I write are based on our sex life. They really do.
Yeah. So
I'm not sure quite how to take that.
With a twinkle in your eye and a shy smile, and let them guess.
I was on I watched a video live feed of a group of about 12 RH authors, and they were going through and taking questions from the audience. And someone asked, you know, how many of you have actually done 3 or more people at a time? And not a single one. It's like all these women that write about 3, 4, 5, 9 group, 9 men groups.
Yeah, that's
not
right.
a single one. More than just, it's like, yeah, okay.
But you know, that's the fantasy element of writing, isn't it? You know, and you could say exactly the same about if you write I don't know, a Witch Academy book. You know, we're not all witches. We don't all do magic either. There's some license there, but not as much as if you're writing fantasy, because it has to have a basis in reality and in the possible.
Yeah.
Somebody asked earlier about erotica. And for the publishing house I work for and for Amazon, there are certain keywords that will tag you for that. Clit is the #1 thing that will put you in erotica. And so there's certain words that will trigger, and you will automatically go, whether your book has a relationship or not, words will tag you. Just thought I'd add that.
That's right. And one of the things, and I don't know, Amazon seems to have narrower and narrower guidelines all of the time. One of the things that they are currently very down on is is having, especially with reverse harem here, is familial relationships. You know, that if your blurb says something about a familial relationship, you can get landed in erotica, or you can even have your book rejected, you know. And the same with daddy books, you know. Apple especially, you know, they really dislike the daddy books.
Okay.
Can I ask what your approach is as far as when you create or have an idea? Is it around a plot or theme, or is it around some form of intimacy, and then you build around that? Which do you do?
I don't plot at all.
Okay.
I actually dream a lot of my plots, a lot of my storylines. I wrote an entire sci-fi book, which I dreamt from start to finish, including the names of the places. But I sent it to my publisher, and they wanted me to strip out virtually all of the word building, replace it with spanking scenes.
Okay.
So that's a very interesting question, and I remember when I first started out, I desperately wanted to write, and I worried that I would run out of ideas. And I also worried that, you know, if you do something like an anthology, for example, where you are having to produce something, you know, that fits into a fairly narrow guideline, that, you know, how would I come up with ideas for something like that? But I guess if you have a creative mind, they just come to you. You know what I mean? And you know, I'm writing something at the moment which will probably be actually very tame, which is literally based on a quote by oh gosh, who played Superman originally?
Christopher
Reeve?
Yeah, that's right, Christopher Reeves. He made a comment about having hope, I think, after his accident. And I'm writing a charity anthology which is literally based just on this quote. Excuse me. But I am a complete pantser. I usually have an idea of the generality of my plot, but sometimes, and I don't know if people who plot have this same issue, but personally I'll find that I will be writing away and I will have my plot, my vague outline of my plot in my head, and things will go off on a complete tangent and they will not, you know, go the way I've expected them to go. And personally, I think that's one of the wonderful things about writing. You know, sometimes you don't know where it's going yourself.
Yeah, I even plotters find that because characters take on a life of their own. They just take on a life of their own. I've had arguments with them, and sometimes I don't win, but most of the times I do. and I haven't been diagnosed as psychotic or schizophrenic yet, although I sometimes wonder. So, but
as long as you don't talk to them in public, I guess.
I talk to them in public. I answer them myself. You know, I do the whole gambit, so it doesn't really make much difference one way or the other. But I think that is an interesting question that you posed, Kelly. For myself, I always start with the idea and a general plot line, and then kind of see where it goes. I haven't ever come across a situation where I started with a romantic scene in my head and then built the entire story around it. I take that back. My second book, which was my first contemporary, was written from a dream. The tail end of a dream was all I remembered, of a man and a woman sitting on a bench next to a pool. And that wasn't actually a sex scene. And the scene in the book came in around chapter 5 or something like that. But sometimes you do have a situation that could be the genesis of the book. I think more, for myself anyway, it's more common to have the plot line instigate what happens to the characters. So.
Right. Well, the reason I asked is because I wrote a passage based on a discussion in the Facebook group that dealt with naming, or the names or words appropriate for anatomy.
Mm-hmm.
And the initiator of that discussion made it clear that she calls hers flower. And so that just got me wondering, and I responded with the passage, but then the passage kind of took on a life of its own.
Mm-hmm.
And developed into me, I guess, exploring my background as far as what flower I would identify, which was honeysuckle. And so in refining that, the couple, because the theme is really about the wife coming home from work. And that was part of the discussion as well, as far as oral sex is concerned. And so in refining that passage, I'm finding there is a deeper relationship here that I guess want to pull out, but I was just looking to see how would one go about building a story around that.
I don't know. I think that's a very intriguing question. And for me, and I don't know about anybody else, and feel free to jump in, but I would relate that specific thing to a wound or a false belief or a flaw in one of the characters that needed to be resolved before the end of the book. That's just me. Anybody else have a thought on that? Okay. I guess not.
Well, appreciate it.
Okay. Are there any more questions for Poppy? I appreciate you being here so much, Poppy, because I know that we started at 11:30 p.m. your time. So I applaud you for being here and being alert and awake. I'm long in bed by that time every night.
Normally I am too, but actually my husband came home, as you could tell earlier. I wasn't actually expecting him home until Sunday. So it's I don't mind being up, because it means I get to see him, because he'll be leaving at 6 o'clock in the morning again.
Okay. All right. Well, any other questions for Poppy? Any other comments that we want to share?
Just want to say
Poppy?
thank you for being here. I really appreciate these chats. Quite Paula and Poppy both for putting this together for us.
Okay, and I did get this recorded, so not tonight, but tomorrow at some time, I will get it posted in the replay, posted in the group, and I will send you a link for the replay, Poppy. I know that you may be wanting to use it in some way, and I thank everybody for being here, and your advice on all the things to include in the sex scenes, I think, is point on, and I thank you very much for bringing that out.
Well, I hope it's useful to everybody.
Okay, well, thank you so very much.
Thank you, and happy writing, everybody.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.